we don't need in the midst of struggle is shame for being human. Brené Brown. This is Ash from the Upside Down Podcast, and you're listening to Miss Jaye, the Renovation.
Alexa, how can I be happier?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, me either. Episode 7. I can take a hint, maybe.
Oh, what fresh hell have I gotten myself into now? Hello and welcome back to another episode of Miss Jaye, the Renovation. I am Janessa J. Champagne, your hostess with the mostest. And let me just start off by saying that if you came for some tears and some heavy moments, this is definitely not going to be the episode for you. There's been some kind of deeper material, a little bit of heavy moments throughout this series. But this book, this episode related to the book Me, My Biggest Solution by Dakon Green is an absolute shit show. In some ways, this book is exactly why I sort of distrust self-help as a genre. And this is really what I had in mind when I initially envisioned the project of just sitting down and reading and making fun of self-help books. And I don't want to belittle his work. I'm sure that he is helping people find inner peace or enlightenment or some shit like that. I don't know. But this book is bananas. So I don't know what else to do except just present to you all of my reactions as I'm going through it. This episode's going to be a little bit different than some of the previous episodes, but I hope you enjoy. Oh, Lord. Let's just jump into it. Part 1. When Self-Published Authors Attack. Okay, so we should probably start by talking about how I found this book in the first place. Because when I was getting ready to start the renovation, I had some idea of different books that I wanted to look at. I wanted to make sure that I had some from different perspectives, different viewpoints, and I wanted to get some that were recommended by other people. And so I started to look around on Amazon and talk to people who I knew who read self-help books to try to get some recommendations and things. And then something just popped up in my inbox. So I should tell you that my work email that I have associated with my website is worldofchampagne@gmail.com. It's not my main personal email address. It's just something that I have so that people can contact me for the site. And I can use it for a couple of things that I don't want to go to my personal email and clog up that mess already. My personal email is a nightmare. And so this is just kind of a holding ground for other things. But it's also an email that gets tagged to a lot of the activity that I do on Amazon. So on Amazon, I review a fair number of products. I've posted a couple hundred reviews and I've gotten some, good feedback on the reviews and things like that. I think I still have a top contributor badge in the makeup and beauty section. And so I've started to get a lot of solicitations for product reviews. So companies that are asking me if they can send me a free product, I say free in air quotes, because generally what they want is they want you to purchase the product first and then they'll reimburse you. And I've seen situations where people have posted the review, it was honest and it wasn't particularly positive, and then the company declined to reimburse them for the product. And so I generally ignore most of these solicitations. I don't want my refund tied to whether or not I liked the product, but sometimes I'll go and I'll look at the products to see if I have any interest in them at all. I'm not going to buy or review something that I wouldn't actually use in my life just because somebody emailed me. And I get tons and tons of these emails. Most of them are not targeted to me at all. They're just reaching out to anybody that has any sort of history of reviewing products on Amazon. And I get these requests from all different kinds of weird companies. So I generally review like makeup and beauty kind of products. I've done a fair number of reviews for books, especially books that I've used like in my gender studies classes. And the one that led to me finding this book is I did a review of Brené Brown's The Gifts of Imperfection. So because of that, I do sometimes get emails from people who are self-help, self-improvement type authors who say, hey, I saw your review of The Gifts of Imperfection. Would you be interested in reviewing my book? And at least these are a little more targeted because some of the things that I get, I'm always getting requests to review like iPhone covers. And it's like, I don't have an iPhone. I've never had an iPhone. Nothing in my purchase history would suggest that I have an iPhone. A couple weeks ago, I got a random request to review garden hoses. The best one that I got recently was somebody who asked me if I wanted to review their products. Didn't tell me what they were, so I wrote back and I said, well, what kind of products do you offer? Because if a company doesn't sell something that I'm actually legitimately interested in, I don't even entertain it. And so they wrote back and they said, we have a line of keyboard covers and a line of sex toys. We're offering an additional bonus for the keyboard covers. I mean, I don't know if they offer any kind of specific bonus if you test them both at the same time, but I let that one go by the wayside. So I had actually started working on putting together the squad and getting prepped for this podcast series back in August of last year. And as I was working on that, I got this email from Dakon Green, who's the author of Me, My Biggest Solution. And it just said, hey, I saw that you reviewed Brene Brown's book. I've written this book. I think you might be interested. I'm trying to get some Amazon reviews. I was wondering if you'd like to review my book. There's a link where you can purchase it, or I can send it to you for free. And so I wrote back to him and I said, actually, it's weird that you reached out because I'm in the middle of planning a podcast project. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to purchase your book so that I don't feel any pressure, any sort of influence about what the review should be. I'm going to include it in the series. I can't guarantee when it will be because I knew it wasn't going to be the first book or anything. And of course, here we are now almost a year later, and I'm finally getting around to reading it. But I said, sure, I would love to read it. I'd love to include it. And I wrote that back to him and I never got a response. I didn't get any sort of like, thank you, enjoy, please let me know when the feedback is posted, blah, 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 any of that. No response whatsoever. And so I got the book and I was putting things in order, and I was trying not to look into the books. I was trying not to figure out what they were. I wanted to be fresh when I went to them for each episode. And so I just kind of tossed it on the pile and I just kind of figured, well, this might fit nicely between, the two books that I sandwiched it in between. And so I brought it with me when I went to Cork this spring for work. I was in Cork, Ireland. And while I was traveling, that's when I finished Amy B. Scher's How to Heal Yourself When No One Else Can, which is the subject of episode 6. And so as I was traveling back home, I was tired because I had a super early flight and I never really adjusted to the time. I was only in Ireland for about a week. And I was traveling back through Amsterdam. And if anybody's been to the Amsterdam airport, I don't know what you think, but I thought it was a nightmare. It was so weirdly organized and there was all this construction and it was just a mess. And so I'm tired and I started reading this book and I was like, what have I gotten myself into? What fresh hell is this? And it just was such a strange experience. And so I put it down and I figure I'll come back to it when I get back to the States. I've been trying not to dip into the next book before I record the episode for the previous book anyway. So I thought I'll just kind of set this to the side. And then once I got back, I got busy with work and I kind of put it down for a little while. And now that I'm coming back to it, it's just as weird and strange as I remember. And so at the time, it kind of felt a little bit like serendipity. I was trying to put together this group of self-help books. I was trying to put together the squad, and this random person just reaches out and is like, hey, I have a self-help book. Would you like to review it? Would you like to read it? And I was like, yes, please. And I think if nothing else, it certainly came into my life to bring some levity, bring some lightness into this series that turned out to be a little bit darker, a little bit more emotionally unsettling than I had planned for this project to be. But I hope you enjoy it. I hope you enjoy my thoughts and my reactions to Me, My Biggest Solution by Dakon Green. Part 2, Mr. Green's Wild Ride. Now, some of you are probably thinking, Miss Jaye, are you just being dramatic? I promise you that my what the fuck reaction to this book is not clickbait. In fact, my first what the fuck moment with this book happened in the introduction on page 3. And so he's talking about his breakup with his first girlfriend, and here's what he says. Of course, after we broke up, I was devastated, all of an emotional hurricane, pouring rain, blankets, Adele songs, and black and white cinematography. I felt restless all day and all night. Though I grew exhausted, my mind scarcely let any thought sleep. And here's where we get to the colorful language that really clued me into what I was about to experience. The next sentence, I couldn't capture thoughts whose wandering might have been a dozen escaped hamsters. You might be thinking, aren't you just being a little bit too harsh? The next moment came on page 6, and this still boggles my mind. On page 6, he says, I wouldn't wish my experiences upon anyone, not even someone who might kidnap and drown a puppy of mine. This goes beyond the level of colorful language. Like, that metaphor kind of creeps me out a little bit. And this, mind you, is still all in the introduction. We haven't gotten to the actual content of the book yet. In this introduction, he talks about this experience of the breakup and having a friend who was tried for some outrageous crime. And then he goes into talking about his experience on Twitter and how he started writing micro poetry. In fact, he really kind of credits Twitter with bringing him through a lot. He says, "Things changed when classmates introduced me to Twitter. They convinced me it was the next best thing, so I gave it a shot, creating an account. I'll spare a full-blown commentary on the miracles of inventing Twitter, but it fascinated me. Twitter was an outline for all the writing my darkness had produced. Armed with the psychotic writings on my phone, I saw my opportunity: revise and tweet." Now, I don't know if we've learned anything from the president we've had from the last couple years, but I don't think that Twitter is quite the miracle that we are being presented in this introduction. I think that Twitter is a scary, awful, sometimes orange place. Now, I don't want to make light of or mock anyone's actual suffering, and I hope they find something that really helps them find peace. But if I'm honest, this whole introduction just sounded like a whole lot of white boy bullshit. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I was in love with this girl and I compromised who I was for her and she broke up with me and it's terrible and I stayed up for like 5 days straight, he claims in the introduction. And sometimes even up to a week. He's talking about all this sleep deprivation and he's talking about sleep deprivation studies, and it just got weird. And so he says in the introduction that what his plan is to sort of give you the framework of self-help. Now, on page 9, he does take a rather ballsy move, and he says, "Are you reading this to stay the same? If you are, waste no more time reading. This book is for people who are ready to think differently. Should you accept my challenge, I dare you to finish this book. Read it 100% through, devour it, dedicate your time, and make it special. If you have already accepted my challenge, please hesitate no longer. Your changed life is just a few pages away." I don't know that it's the best idea after giving us the image of somebody putting your puppy in a bag and drowning it 3 pages ago to challenge us to not read the book. That seems maybe like not the best course of action, but it's ballsy. It's ballsy. I'll give him that. And so then on page 11, he gives us instructions with an actual header that says how to read this book. I think that if you're writing a book and your book has to come with instructions on how to read the book, maybe that says something about your book. If you know how to read and you have a book in front of you, it seems like that process should sort of take care of itself, especially when he says, "This book is not a workbook. There are no exercises at the end of each chapter. Instead, this is an informational book that highlights certain points with reflection. All are embedded within this text. There are bonuses for you to download, and they come free with this book. Go to the website for instant access to your free bonus content." And you know a bitch is real curious, and I'm going to have to check out that online content. So he felt the need to put in instructions to tell you that there wasn't anything out of the ordinary. It's just reading a fucking book. And so his instructions are to read the book. I don't have words. I don't have words. And then he goes in with, he has another section called Major Life Lessons Ahead. And then he kind of breaks down what the different chapters are going to cover. In chapter 1, he defines personal development. In chapter 2, I review the meanings behind emotions. In chapter 3, you learn the importance of having problems and how a lack of problems may be your biggest problem. I got 99 problems and a bitch ain't one. Chapter 4 outlines the first steps in validating thoughts and emotions. Chapter 5 is dedicated to a discussion of self-concept. Chapter 6 is about reversing struggle. Chapter 7 is about the law of attraction. Oh good, we're going back there, because I didn't get enough of that with You Are a Badass. In chapter 8, he explores metaphysics behind experience and provides detailed explanations for how focus and attention can be directly used to manifest your dream reality. We've got a whole lot of fucking manifesting going on in here. I'm gonna manifest myself a migraine. Chapter 8 is about subconscious communication, nonverbal communication. Chapter 10 discusses how identity is formed and how your thoughts are rarely original expressions of character. Oh, so I'm unoriginal now too. Thanks. This book is great for my self-esteem, that's for sure. Chapter 11 is an elaborative section that combines the concepts learned in chapters 2 and 10. And the final chapter, chapter 12, I compare the old success formulas with newer models. I explain how to best approach progress, how incremental progress is terribly ineffective. And I provide a new perceptual framework that does not require you to live by somebody else's rules, even mine. Now granted, that's 12 chapters. And this book is a scant 92 pages at the end of the conclusion. And after the conclusion, there's some recommendations for further reading and other resources. There's also a section of chapter summaries. I am not trying to be a bitch here. I mean, maybe a little. But if you have 12 chapters and an introduction and a conclusion, and you're less than 100 pages, do you really need chapter summaries? I kind of feel like the chapters are the chapter summaries, because they're kind of only as long as a chapter summary. Am I being petty? Am I being a bitch? Like I'm looking at this and I'm really trying, because I understand that he's really trying to make a difference, and in the introduction, amidst all the craziness, there was a description of some real painful experiences. And I don't want to belittle that. I don't want to act like I'm, belittling his experiences. But at the same time, there is something about it that really feels like it comes from this place of white boy privilege. He talks about this horrible experience where he couldn't sleep and he couldn't eat, and all he could do was tweet and write weird things in his journals or whatever. And all of that came just because he broke up with his first girlfriend. And I get that breakups are hard. And I get that when you're a teenager and when you're younger, breakups are even worse because everything is the end of the world and you're dramatic. I remember that time. I'm not going to dismiss what teenagers think and go through, but it just feels like pretty privileged white boy nonsense. It just feels like somebody who hasn't really had to go through anything that traumatic outside of the usual traumas that people experience. Breakups, moving, going to college and having to adapt to a new life, those kinds of things. There's no big dramatic story about anything that happened in his life, no abuse, no neglect, any of that. It's all just kind of focused around he broke up with his first girlfriend and kind of went on this sort of bender, not like drinking or drugs or whatever, but just sort of like this weird emotional bender. And I'm going to stick with it. I'm taking the challenge, but I just am a little bit skeptical. I just have to sigh. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But that's the introduction. Escaped hamsters and drowned puppies and young love and heartbreak and Adele songs and Twitter, all of it. And I'm going to take the challenge and I'm going to see what I can do. We're going to power on through. I get the feeling it's going to be a wild ride. Part 3, and so it begins. All right, so after recording the material about the introduction, I took a little break from this book and I came back and I started chapter 1. And the first page of chapter 1 kind of makes sense. I'm like, why did I think this was so weird? Why did I think this was such a strange book? The second paragraph starts off with self-change is a personal choice. It is not something that can be decided by your spouse, partner, friend, or cousin. Self-change is best approached on your own initiative. Seeking to change yourself upon the request of a loved one will surely backfire. And I think that's absolutely true. You have to be self-motivated because it's not just about changing for somebody else. It's about wanting to change for yourself. So I thought, okay, maybe there's something to this. Maybe the introduction just went a little bit off the rails. Maybe it was, his personal story. So he's kind of wrapped up in it and maybe we'll get into more of the helpful stuff. Then I turn the page. On the next page, he says, as Google defines, self-development is the process by which a person's character or abilities are gradually developed. Oh, and the former comp instructor in me died a little bit. First of all, Google doesn't define anything. Google is a search engine that connects you to other resources. So now everything that he writes about in here, even if he quotes it or is attributing it to something, it's suspect because he thinks that Google defined a word for him. Maybe he Googled and then got dictionary.com or got, a Wikipedia page on self-improvement or self-development. Oh, Jesus. Okay. Typically, when you experience explosive results, it won't be long until your life starts to decline to a baseline again. This is the tragedy of seeking quick fixes. They are impermanent and elusive. Clearly, when he contacted me, he didn't understand what this process was going to be about. I'm all about the fast track. I'm all about the shortcut. I don't know what's going on. This is so weird. By changing yourself, you have the power to change your life. Your life changes when you change. Simple. Your journey of self-change begins and ends with one person. You. I feel like there's been 2 pages in a book that's only like 92 pages of entire content. We've already spent 2 pages for him to just tell me over and over again that self-change and self-development only happens if I want it to happen. No shit, Sherlock. Can we get some content? I mean, I guess I should be happy that there's no drowned puppies or anything so far, but I just don't know about this approach. We'll see. All right, so after 2 pages of telling me that self-help and self-change will only happen if I want it to happen, and if I'm doing it through my own intrinsic motivation, now there's like 2 pages talking about questions. The questions that you ask yourself are more important than the answers you receive. And then he talks about a couple of books, Change Your Questions, Change Your Life by Marilee G. Adams and Marshall Goldsmith, and The Book of Questions by Gregory Stock. And he talks a little bit about the way that we phrase questions. And this is something that I think is absolutely true. And I think that that's something that I've seen in some of the other books that I've read, is that the way that you phrase questions and the way that you talk about yourself is important. The way that you phrase your language. So, in the How to Be Single and Happy book, the idea of phrasing some of your self-talk in different ways. So not saying, I am sad, because then you're saying that that's like a condition, that you are sad, that defines you, versus a feeling, I feel sad. And that makes sense. And there's a couple of examples of self-criticisms. Why is this happening to me? How could I be so stupid? Versus then on the next page, he gives a couple of examples of questions that come more from a learner mindset. What can I do better for next time? How did I make things difficult for myself? How can I be better? Which all makes sense. But this entire chapter is called Personal Development 101. And it's literally those 4 pages. 2 pages of him telling you that self-development is only going to happen if you want it to happen and you take control, put in the work, and 2 pages of saying, you should ask better questions. Like, this isn't even a 101 class. This is like the shitty brochure for the 101 class. There's so little actual material here. There's one quote in here that's bolded, by the way. He's one of those. He likes to bold. Like, don't just write it so that you can understand what your point is. Bold your point. When you ask great questions, you receive great answers. Not if you ask shitty people. So I am over chapter 1 already. Let's see if chapter 2 gets any better. I'm not holding out hope. So now I'm into chapter 2, which is called What It Means to Feel, and it's all about emotions. And I feel sometimes like I don't even understand what he's trying to say. Like, I recognize all of the words separately, but I'm not entirely sure what they mean when he puts them together. It's so strange. At the very beginning, he starts by saying, some authors explain that fear is a form of irrationality. Fear is to be dismissed, disregarded, and subdued into the depths of our minds. These authors are only half correct. Fear is completely rational, since if you did not have the capacity to experience shifts, even negative ones, in emotions, you would have no identifiable way for knowing what you enjoy. Emotions exist as physical indicators of your experiential preferences. If you had no internal recognition system, how would you know which parts of your life need changing and when? I don't know exactly what he's saying, but he seems to think that all emotions are sort of equal or function in the same way, but that's not what fear is all about at all. If we think about the fight or flight response, that's a primary fear response where we encounter something new, we encounter a person or a situation or something that's unfamiliar, and our sort of primitive brain kicks in and says, this may be a threat. Can I fight it? Can I attack it? And will I win? Or should I run away? Should I try to flee it? Now that's a survival instinct, and that shift in emotion is important for our survival and has ensured that we've continued on to create the society that publishes books like this. But it's not necessarily a rational thing. It's an important thing and it's worthwhile, but it's not necessarily rational. We encounter things all the time that aren't rational to have fight or flight responses about, but we do. A lot of our emotions really are not rational. They're not about that. And then he says, as humans, we are particularly motivated by fear. Thus, it is paramount to our self-development if we wish to make it past the end of this sentence. What? It's all either just weird, incomprehensible ramblings, or it's something that just is so generic. It's like a fucking greeting card. And again, there's so much in here. As I went through this, there's so much of this that just smacks of a certain level of privilege. Haven't you noticed that the only times when you feel worried are the times you think have the greatest impact on your life? No, I don't know if you've ever been a queer person living in the Midwest. I don't just worry about choices that I'm gonna make and things that are part of my life. I worry about shit that happens all the time. I'm not somebody who typically has a lot of anxiety, but this idea that you would only experience worry around your own personal choices and your own personal development, that's such a privileged place to live in, where you don't have to worry about the choices that other people make, and sometimes the violent choices that other people make. And then he goes on to say, contrary to what most people believe, if you were to approach a millionaire at home, so you got through the gates and got past the guards and now you're in their home, and you were to claim that you were going to own a home like theirs someday, they probably wouldn't laugh in your face. Why? Because they know exactly what you mean. They believe you. They believe in you. They know you will when you say you will because they've done it for themselves. It was possible for them, so it's also possible for you. The sort of Pollyanna privileged bullshit that's dripping off of that sentence is so ridiculous. First of all, just getting into the sort of the socioeconomic history of this country, the problems of generational wealth and the way that the wealthy, have all of these laws and rules that protect them, the way that they're able to, shelter assets and things like that. So the idea that every millionaire is just somebody who started from nothing and became a millionaire, like we all start from an equal place and then you either choose to be a millionaire or you don't. I'm like, who is this person? Who is the person who wrote this book? Okay, so now he went and made a bitch mad because now he's talking about emotions like attention. It makes them feel important. Yes, absolutely. I am a person who is very much about stewing in my emotions. If I get worked up, it's hard for me to talk myself down. But then he goes on to say, when you are wrong, you become upset. If you are upset, you become very wrong. Now, here's where I'm going to lose my shit a little bit. He says, you may get into a political battle with someone across the table, but if you are getting upset, it means that what you are thinking is incorrect. You may perceive yourself to be winning the argument, but if you are angry, then it means that you are having false thoughts. It may not be that what you are saying is incorrect. Although factually you may have all the right information, your anger signals that your thinking includes something besides the point of the argument. Here's where I'm going to give a big fat fuck you to Dakon Green. And he probably set me off by talking about it in terms of politics. But right now in this country, there are a lot of people whose politics, quote unquote, includes the idea that people like me and people in my community don't deserve to exist and be here and have the same rights and protections. It is not irrational to be angry about that. It is not irrational to have people sit across the table from you and tell you that your existence is somehow inappropriate or unacceptable to them. Fuck you. You don't get to decide who is acceptable or who is appropriate. That is not something that is irrational to be angry about that. And telling people that they have to be calm and telling people that they can't have an emotion around that is a way that people have discredited all kinds of marginalized communities for years. That's the stereotype of the uppity queer or the angry black woman. This idea that if you somehow have an emotion around an ideological argument, that you are less credible. I mean, that's just sexism. That's the stereotype of the hysterical woman. It's a way of controlling people by saying that the emotion they feel about having their very existence invalidated invalidates their argument. This is some privileged white boy bullshit. And of course, the ridiculous fuckery just continues in chapter 3, which is a sad 5.5 pages called The Meaning of Problems. And it is so convoluted and bizarre. He gives a situation of somebody who's always late. And so they're trying to make changes. They leave their house early, trying to give themselves enough time for traffic. They set their alarm earlier, but nothing's working. They're always late. But then they come across the idea that being late can be a good thing. Okay. So they learn that it can be a good thing. And so instead of just embracing that being late is a good thing, they now leave the house so ridiculously early that there's no chance of being late, and they're always 2 hours early. This makes no goddamn sense. What is he trying to say? Because the whole chapter is supposed to be about taking actions, making actions to support whatever change you want. But in this case, the person is taking actions to try to change the problem. The problem is being late. But instead, he says, give yourself a problem to take action against that will solve the other problem. So give yourself a new problem that somehow counteracts the old one. So if you decide that being late is a good thing, then you'll take actions to not be late ever. That is so stupid, because in the first part of the situation, you were taking actions to not be late because being late was the problem. But then if you give yourself a new problem, and the problem is that being late can be good, so then you're trying to be early. I mean, it just makes no goddamn sense. And even if you did that, why would that be a success? There's a line in here that says, but since I've decided to take massive action, I'm now the guy who shows up 2 hours earlier than necessary. This is a personal success because now the problem isn't being late. It's what will I do for 2 hours until I'm needed. Being 2 hours early to everything is not a success. If you can't manage your time to be remotely on time or be a little bit early, and you have to be 2 hours early or else you're going to be late, then you just fucking don't know how to adult. I mean, the absolute fuckery in this. And then the end of the chapter, he decides to give us some inspirational wisdom from a song. And we know that there are lots of songs that have inspirational lyrics or beautiful sentiments. This is what he says. I would like you to remember the lyrics to the classic song, Row, row, row your boat. The song ends with life is but a dream. And this statement packs more truth than you may have realized. First of all, this book is such shenanigans and fuckery that immediately when he said row, row, row your boat, all I could think of was the scene from Troll 2 where they're driving to Nilbog and they're fighting in the car and the mom makes them sing row, row, row your boat.
Never liked that kid, I never did.
I'm the one who has to like him, Dad. Me alone.
Stop it, please. Joshua, start singing. Come on, sing that song I like so much.
I don't feel like singing, Mom.
Just sing.
Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream.
Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream.
But then after invoking this bizarre song, he doesn't really explain what it means. Why is life a dream? How does that help us take action? There's no substance to this book, and I'm starting to lose my patience. You might have noticed from my tone that I just am getting fed up with the ridiculousness of this book. How did I get myself into this? Part 4. Testing my patience. All right, as I was working on that last section, I realized I have to do something differently. I am already about 30 minutes into recording or a little bit more, and I've only covered 3 of the 12 chapters plus the introduction. I feel like the commentary around the chapters is longer than the chapters themselves. I just find something and it just enrages me, and I'm starting to feel a little bit like Divine in Hairspray.
I've got nothing but hampers of ironing to do, and my diet pill is wearing off.
And if there were more substance to the chapters, more that deserved that much commentary, I would maybe consider keeping on with the same style that I've been doing. But this just isn't that deep, so we're going to speed racer through this a little bit. The next few parts I'm going to take on 3 chapters at a time, so this section is going to be on chapters 4, 5, and 6, and then there will be 2 additional parts that also take on 3 chapters. So chapter 4, which is barely 4 pages, is all about habits and when you feel stuck. and he compares your life to trap music and talks about when there's a lot of vamping, which is sort of the tone going up and up and up and up and up and crescendoing until the bass drops and then you get this sort of release of dopamine or whatever. That's a little bit how I feel about this book. I keep waiting for there to be some payoff. I keep waiting for the bass to drop because you know I'm all about that bass. Sorry. And all this chapter is a bunch of hallmarky bullshit. It's just a bunch of live by the routines of your choosing. Structure the day according to your schedule. Make time for yourself before you make time for others. So apparently people have no responsibilities, nobody else that they have to consider in how they schedule their day. It's just all up to you. And then he gives that thing about if you don't like what you're doing, then stop doing it. If it's your job that you hate and it's your job that contributes most to your misery, then why torture yourself? Nobody is forcing you to do that at gunpoint. It's you who's holding yourself hostage. And yes, if you don't like what you're doing, you should start looking around for other things, but this is so out of touch with the actual job world, and it's just dripping with survivor bias. So if you have one person who comes out and tells the story of, I hated my job and one day I just quit and walked out and I created the life that I wanted and everything's been wonderful. Well, yeah, you're hearing their story because it worked for them and they are successful and they're there to tell the story. For all of the other people who just decided one day without any sort of planning or preparation to quit their job, some of them went on to become homeless or they got so depressed that they killed themselves. Just because you hear the success stories doesn't mean that that's the only story. You still have to make smart decisions for your life. Now, chapter 5 is even more of this ridiculous fuckery. I've come to the most ridiculous, stupid statement that I could find, and every chapter surprises me in some new and terrible way. So chapter 5 is letting go of your past, and it's basically just a bunch of assertions that if you don't like something, don't do it. If you don't like the way you're thinking about something, don't think that way. If you don't like your thought patterns, think other thought patterns. If you worry, don't worry. I think that's the problem with this book, and that's why the problem with having these short chapters is that there's nothing that's actually practical or trying to tell you how to do something. It's just like, oh, worry sends cortisol into your blood, and that's bad, and then it'll cause problems with your body. So don't worry. Well, how are you not supposed to worry? Well, because you're thinking bad thoughts, so just don't think bad thoughts. I mean, there's just nothing. And then the kicker, I laughed out loud at this. I mean, come on now. This is his example that he says under accept only good things. It says, are you living at home with a parent who nags you to work at a job that you hate? By showing such a parent that it's not them getting up every day, putting on your shoes, and going to work for you, you take a stand informing them of your freedom to choose. The choice is completely yours. Listen, you broke ass bitch. If you are living with your parents, they absolutely can tell you to get a goddamn job. You are an adult. They are not required to house your lazy broke ass. He says your life can be as good as the things you accept for yourself. You better hope that the parents in this hypothetical situation don't read this book, because they're going to be like, yeah, you're right. We don't have to accept that lazy broke ass loser kid that we got living in the basement with his Judas Priest posters. This is so stupid. At some point, I promise I'm going to come back around and I'm going to give some more thoughtful thoughts on this book. But right now, the shenanigans that I'm sitting through, I just can't. So just bear with me a little bit longer. All right, so chapter 6 is a whopping 6 pages, and if you were thinking that maybe that additional length would lead to additional depth, well, prepare yourself for disappointment. Part of the reason why it's longer is because this chapter title is so long and is in ridiculously large font. So chapter 6 is when to stop resisting and start allowing your limitless life to unfold. And this is where we start to get some of that secret manifest the life you want bullshit. But it's completely incomprehensible. It's so muddled up. It's like he took a coffee table book of motivational posters and just put it together in a blender, threw in some sort of vocabulary workbook, ground it all together, and then smeared it out on 6 shitty pages. I mean, he starts off the chapter, so much of your suffering is useless because you believe that things need to be difficult. You don't need to struggle to learn or grow. You can see evidence of this right out your window. Look outside. Can you see the lawn? Observe the grass growing. Be like a blade of glass. Wait, oh, that's supposed to be blade of grass, or maybe it's supposed to be blade of glass. At this point, who even knows? It does not hurt itself to grow. It just grows. A tree does not think about how high to limit itself. It just grows and keeps growing. I mean, how is this supposed to be helpful to anyone? And then on the next page, it just starts getting into this weird, throwing out all of these words and muddling different ideas together in the same paragraph. I mean, just looking at the bold sentences in here, I don't know how you're supposed to follow this. Scarcity is a concept much like limitation. It is entirely made up. There is no true scarcity. There is no true lack. Your desires and the fulfillment of your desires are meant to be received without your physical efforts. Effort is not to be confused with action, because you can take actions that require no effort. Enduring resistance is detrimental to your personal development. When you are living in circumstances that bear incredible amounts of resistance, consider your solutions in need of reconsideration. What the fuck are you saying? And then he gets into this whole thing about gratefulness into gratitude. Gratitude and gratefulness are different in some respects. Gratefulness is a temporal mode of being, while gratitude is a feeling state of steadfast gratefulness. Both of these words have strikingly similar textbook definitions, but both do not mean the same thing contextually. Gratefulness is a prerequisite to experiencing gratitude. If you wish to accelerate your life, gratitude is your best tool to multiply happiness. The more of it you feel, the faster your life changes. Optimism is a terrific mindset to occupy. Nevertheless, it is less effective as a means of saying that you should be grateful for everything in your life. Optimism and gratefulness are not synonymous. I mean, just like this word is like this word, but it's not like this word, and you should use it similar to this one, but different, and the context, and it just goes on, and then it gets down to the bottom of this page. I could one-up the ludicrousness proposing a hypothetical situation where you are in the hospital with an ankle shattered in 16 different places, and a friend says, at least you can be thankful that your ankle isn't shattered in 19 different places. Get over here and let me punch you in the face 50 times. That's the first time I've agreed with him in this entire book. Please come over here so I can punch you in the face 50 times. Part 5. Maybe you should have kept that secret. All possibilities are available to you. Put a pin in that. So now we're getting into the part of the book where it's becoming about the secret and all that sort of manifesting stuff. And he's already sort of mentioned it a little bit in the previous chapters when he talked about scarcity and opportunities. And he's kind of the worst example of what I hate about the secret. Because when you actually just look at the secret, it sort of implies that if things aren't going your way, it's your fault. Because somehow you didn't actually manifest well enough. You didn't really believe what you were doing. You didn't really put your energy into it, or you focused on the wrong things and brought negativity into your life. But it always sort of implies it in a more indirect way, whereas he pretty much comes right out and is like, well, there's not really any scarcity in the world. It's just your problem if you didn't manifest it right. So let's see what kind of shenanigans we get with chapters 7, 8, and 9. Oh God, we're starting off chapter 7 with a real winner. He says, when you are at the grocery store, you see magazines in the checkout line. The headlines are captivating, and if they were online, they would be considered clickbait. I just can't even with this. Oh God, give me some yoga pants, some Ugg boots, and a puffy vest, and a pumpkin spice latte, because I am a basic white girl and I can't even. I even had a tiny little bit of hope that maybe this chapter would attempt to have more content to it because it's a whopping 9 pages long. But then you get into it and it's the same fluffy nonsense generic statements, but in the middle, there is a section where he tells a story about trying to get to a meeting and he's following his GPS and it's taking him to the wrong locations. And that story is 5 pages long. A 5-page story about how he's trying to drive to this important meeting. And it's the type of meeting, he says, where if you don't go, the repercussions will echo for decades. Yeah, that's some shit that he said. And it just seems like more evidence that this guy does not know how to adult. He left his house an hour and a half before the meeting for something that's supposed to be a 20-minute drive, and he ended up showing up 2 hours and 15 minutes late. And it's supposed to be an example about how he focused on the wrong things and he got caught up in the negativity. To me, it's just an example that you don't know how to function in the world. I mean, I understand that sometimes your GPS can take you on weird routes. That's not manifesting. And at one point he started talking about the weather. Like, bitch, you didn't manifest the weather, okay? And then he has a little section where he gives us the moral of the story. And it says, everything that is happening to you in life is happening in your favor. Well, if he ever listens to this podcast, I wonder if he'll think that reaching out to me was life happening in his favor. And now he's telling a story about a time when his computer died and it needed a new hard drive. And he took it to a repair shop and they told him it was going to be like $800 plus $300 for the hard drive. And he says, I found that I could use the computers at the library whenever they were open. They were free to use, and had I not given myself permission to accept this as an option, I never would have discovered one of the most beautiful indoor waterfall parks. What the actual fuck is going on right now? I feel like I've fallen into this pit of crazy that I can't get out of. I feel like Will Wheaton in the last episode of season 3 of The Guild after Codex wins the battle.
Are you skull fucking me right now? You must be skull fucking me right now because I can feel it right here in this eye socket.
So getting to the end of this chapter, there literally is no content. There is no discussion of how to manifest, how to work towards the things that you want, how to focus on what you want. It's just examples of times where things went wrong in his life and they ended up going better. So he ends with this story where his car broke down in his garage and he didn't have money to fix it. And so he had it towed out of his garage. And then this is how the chapter ends. Incredibly, at the end of that month, someone gave me their car outright. Essentially, my old car had broken down so that I could prepare my garage for a better one that didn't cost me anything. I'm amazed. You? What the fuck kind of ending is that? It's this idea that if you just believe hard enough and focus on it, someone will just give you a car? It's just these weird example stories without any context, without any sort of substance to it. I mean, I know that he started off this whole book by saying it wasn't a workbook. Maybe it should have been a workbook. Okay, so chapter 8 is 6 pages that I just absolutely cannot understand. It's so haphazard and mixed metaphors and things just running all over the place. He's talking about you are the infinite reality, and he's talking about time and space and multiple realities and how billions of multiple existences exist because we're making choices. I mean, he's bringing in metaphors of the Starship Enterprise entering warp speed and Google Street View and a steamboat. And then he's talking about the 3 layers of consciousness. There is one level of you who thinks and who talks. The second level you notices that you think thoughts and can talk. But then on an entirely new third level, you know there's a you who sees what you're thinking and that you have the ability to speak to others. You are much more than the you on the surface. You are not making any goddamn sense. You, Dakon Green. And then it just becomes more of this amorphous sort of secrety bullshit about everything is possible. So you just choose to make it so or make it not so. But again, there's nothing that really sort of has any kind of substance or concrete sort of lesson about what that means. This whole chapter is a wash for me. Oh God, can I just be done now? What did I get myself into? So chapter 9 is just more ridiculous skullfuckery. It's called Expressions of Your Subconscious Mind. I just kind of laughed out loud when I read this part. It said, understanding nonverbal cues reveals subconscious truths. This is why interpreting body language has become so important to me. I know that people cannot control every part of their body. Inevitably, their body exposes hidden truths in one way or another. People who try too hard to control their body language look like scarecrows without straw. Very unnatural. What? I feel like this guy is that guy who's like sitting in the corner at a party and he has to sit with his back to the wall so he can like watch all the exits. And like if you get too close and he starts to talk to you, he'll tell you that like he trained as a ninja. And it's like, just calm the fuck down, white boy. And then, so this chapter is 4 pages long. So one of the shortest in the book. And he's got this part at the end where he says 10 simple habits between you and your mastery, and then tells you that he's developed a separate training course that gives away the secrets behind your nonverbal expressions. And you can download it at his website. And his website, by the way, if this isn't a clue that this is some snake oil charlatanism, his website isn't even a fucking .com. His website is projectdream.life. Okay. And he said it comes free with this book. This chapter is 4 pages. Put it in the goddamn book. Why do I have to download another shitty book that you wrote? There's nothing in this book that suggests that this other book you want me to download is any better. There is no excuse for having a 12-chapter book that's less than 100 pages. Put it in the book, Dakon. Put it in the book. Part 6. Eat, Pray, Love for Fuckwits. Ugh, why is this episode so goddamn long? I just am getting tired of this. So these last 3 chapters are just more of the same. In chapter 10, choosing for yourself, I mean, it's just more almost incomprehensible bullshit, except one thing we discover is that he also is a part-time wedding DJ, and he's decided that being a DJ makes him an outsider. This chapter talks a lot about being an insider versus being an outsider, and being a DJ makes him an outsider because it's not normally cool, and if everybody else was trying to be a DJ, he wouldn't be a DJ because he doesn't want to be part of the in-group. And so it's like, okay, I know who you are. You're that weird guy who lives in his parents' basement and is mad because they want him to get a job.
This 30-year-old dude is facing an eviction threat from his own parents.
That's just so ridiculous.
Michael Rotundo's mom and dad are so fed up, they're suing to get him out of the house.
I don't see why the judge wants to throw people on the street.
And so then you get a job as a part-time wedding DJ so that you can go to Pancake House with your other DJ friends afterwards and talk about how cool an outsider you are. You're like hipsters, but even more sad. I just am getting angry about how much time I've put into this stupid book when it's telling me nothing. And then at the end of the chapter, after giving us all of these little terms that don't fit together and that he doesn't really explain and doesn't give any real concrete sort of examples of, then he just brings it back to the law of attraction. You cannot have a happy future if you are living in a miserable present. Well, sir, you are making my present very miserable right now. So we can keep this short and sweet. Chapter 11, Trusting in Your Decisions, is 6 pages of absolute tripe where the only thing that we actually learn is that he's a dick. He has a section where he says, have you ever had a relative ask you to pick them up from the airport? You agreed despite misgivings because you panicked, not wanting to sound like a douchebag. Am I right? I bet when you hung up, you began to feel some resentment towards whomever had asked you. Now I gotta pick up stupid old grandma from the airport. Your poor grandma should get an Uber from the airport because you are a 1-star douchebag. And he brings up grandma needing a ride from the airport multiple times in the 6 pages. I'm sure your grandmother is so sorry that her one trip to the airport is cutting into your busy schedule of wedding DJing and writing shitty micro poetry on Twitter. This book is like a 100-page exploration of how this person is a terrible human being that doesn't know how to adult. Thank you. Next. All right, so chapter 12, the last chapter, is called New Formulas for Success. Spoiler alert, there's no actual fucking formulas in this entire chapter. The closest thing we get to any sort of concrete advice or practice is him telling you to build a dream board and make it as realistic as you want, or make it as unrealistic as you want. That's not helpful, sir. And then there's this moment where he starts talking about when he checks the clock on his phone, he takes screenshots because he's intrigued with numeric patterns, like 11:11, 12:34, 2:22, 2:34, 3:33, 3:45, 4:44, 5:55. You know this is not an accident. It is a message to me, from me, to remind myself of what I have chosen those number patterns to mean. The numbers alone mean nothing. They become important when I assign them a meaning. I understand that I have created my reality. Well, the reality you've created is that now that you get everywhere 2 hours early, you have nothing to do but sit and take screenshots of the clock on your phone. There's part of me as I'm reading this that I feel like I'm reading a mental breakdown as it's happening. It's just a little bit frenzied and a little bit bizarre. You know, in another one of these bolded sections where he gives me one of the main points, it says, rise beyond what you believe you are capable of. Get over it. You're a boss. You are the real poop. And then the next paragraph, rules are meant to be broken. If the man has got you down, enact revenge by being the best version of yourself that you can be, and then live life from the heavens of your creation. Boom. I feel like we've lost control at some point here. I feel like at some point, I've got somebody who's a part-time wedding DJ who lives in his parents' basement and is 2 hours early to everything and takes screenshot of the time on his phone, is telling me that I can live the most wonderful life that I can imagine because I'm the real poop. That doesn't sound amazing to me. And you're mean to your grandma. What the fuck is going on? What is the shenanigans and fuckery of this book? I've gotten to the end and I'm like, I don't even know how to process the absolute fuckery of what I've just read. And I hope it's entertaining because at least that will be something, because I certainly didn't get any sort of useful, practical, helpful information from this book. This member of the squad did not come here to work. It definitely clocked out early. She took a break and just never came back. Part 7. I don't think I'll be getting a Christmas card. So Dakon Green contacted me about reading his book and reviewing it because he read my review of Brené Brown's The Gifts of Imperfection, and he thought that if I enjoyed that book, I might enjoy his book. That's a pretty bold move, Mr. Green, to compare yourself to Brené Brown. I have to give you credit for the cojones, but if you haven't figured out from this episode so far, I don't think it really worked in his favor. When it all comes down to it, it's just a lot of babble. It's not very well organized. It's not very well edited. There's no real concrete usable content, and it just sort of rehashes The Secret without even having the level of detail and specificity and content of The Secret. But you know, when I was originally planning this series, I originally thought it was going to be a little bit more of a comedy kind of series of just reading some self-help books and making fun of them and not taking it all too seriously. And with this book that just sort of dropped into my lap, I kind of manifested that. The other books in the series have been a little bit more useful. There's been some emotional moments, but this was kind of what I had originally anticipated this series to be like from the beginning. Maybe there is something to all this manifesting. If it's true, clearly I was focused on the wrong things because this episode has been the most stressful, has gotten my blood pressure up the most, and I'm very excited to be done with this book. So in the conclusion, he gives you kind of a wrap up where he just tells you what he told you. It's kind of like the high school version of the 5-paragraph paper where you have the introduction. This is what I'm going to tell you. Then you have 3 paragraphs where you tell them what you're going to tell them. And then you have a conclusion that says, this is what I just told you. That's what this is. I feel like there's 12 paragraphs here that just say, you learned about this. You know about this. I don't know nothing, sir. Like, you didn't teach me nothing in this book. And then it goes into you can become part of the story. If you want to contribute to this project, here are a few things you can do. Send me your story. Share the book with your friends. I value my friends. I'm not going to be sharing this book with them because they would stop being my friends. Get in touch. He gives you his email and his Twitter. Leave your feedback. And then he asks for an Amazon review. Reviews help people understand what the book is all about. I'd be incredibly appreciative if you gave an honest star rating and left a few thoughts. Is something missing? Yeah, a book. What part did you like best? When it was over? How do you feel after reading it? Like I never want to read it again and that I'll never get the hours back that I spent reading it back. I shouldn't say hours. It's 92 pages. Each chapter is like 4 pages. It didn't take that long. And then he says, reviews also show that the book is legitimate. I mean, I can see how you'd be looking for legitimacy for this, and that people are actually reading it. So even if you don't have anything to say but still want to give it a 5-star rating, I'll take it. Again, bold move, sir. A 5-star rating? I think not. So even though it's all in good fun, I realize that this episode does sort of turn me into one of the mean girls of the internet. Like Dakon Green is trying to make fetch happen, and I'm the Regina George who just comes in to ruin his fun.
That is so fetch. Gretchen, stop trying to make fetch happen. It's not going to happen.
And man, I don't want to be that person. I appreciate that he reached out to me and asked me to review his book. And I understand that he put a lot of time and effort into this project. And I really do appreciate that he seems to have an authentic, genuine desire to help people live better lives. And I think that that's admirable. I think that it comes from an authentic, genuine place. But oh, come on. He's got some work to do here. There's just no actual content. He's got a whole lot of word soup, but there's not a lot that you can really take and put into practice. And that's, I think, what has really bugged me about self-help is that sometimes, based on experiences that I've had in the past, I always felt like self-help was a genre that was a lot of fluff and not a lot of substance. But as I'm reading through a lot of these books, I have found some books that actually have some content and have some things that you can do and put into practice and use to try to improve your life. And I think that anybody that has a desire to contribute to that should be commended for trying to make the world a better place rather than just only looking out for their own self-interest. So I do hope that he continues with it. I hope he develops more actual usable content. And I appreciate that he reached out to me and he did offer to send me a free copy of the book. Now, I did purchase the book on Amazon. I did pay for it because, again, I didn't want any sort of review or any reading of it to be colored by the fact that I got it for free. But I do appreciate the gesture. But after all this, I just feel like maybe I'm not going to make it onto Dakon Green's Christmas card list this year. And if I do, you should send help, because it means he has my address, and if I disappear, he should be at the top of your suspect list. Part 8. Howdy, strangers. So for the second time in this series, the introductory Brené Brown quote was read by Ash from the Upside Down podcast. And I'm not afraid to say that they are the premier Stranger Things podcast out there on the market today. If you're not subscribed to them, if you're not listening to them, you absolutely need to. And you need to follow their Instagram as well. Their Instagram is at The Upside Down Podcast, and they have a website at theupsidedownpod.com. They are from the Atlanta area. It's sisters Ash and Tori. And because they live near where the show films, they've had the opportunity to visit sets. They've interviewed cast and crew and extras from the series. And Ash and her daughter Kilby actually had the opportunity to be extras in an episode of season 3. And of course, my absolute favorite episode was their interview with Ingrid Michaelson. Ingrid Michaelson put out an album called Stranger Songs, which is all inspired by characters and situations and events from Stranger Things. And it turns out that her boyfriend is one of the characters on the show. If you want to find out who he plays, you'll have to listen to their episode interviewing Ingrid Michaelson. And yours truly even gets a little special shout out during the episode. I am so blessed to have these two wonderful women as friends and fellow podcasters. And I just hope that I have opportunities to collaborate with them again in the future because they are so much fun and they really do produce some really wonderful content. So as we're finishing out this episode, as Ash and Tori would say, stay strange.
Miss Jaye, The Renovation is a 17-episode limited series podcast presented by Champagne Dreams Productions. While we're all here to have fun, mental health is a serious issue. Nothing in this podcast series should be taken as medical advice, and listening to podcasts or reading self-help books is not a substitute for proper mental health care. If you or someone you know is considering suicide, please contact the Suicide Prevention Hotline at 1-800-273-8255 or visit suicidepreventionhotline.org for more information. I love all of my Champagne Dreamers out there. Stay safe and stay alive.
This episode of Miss Jaye, The Renovation includes royalty-free music from bensound.com. The tracks featured in this episode in order are Clear Day, Enigmatic, Relaxing, Ukulele, Little Idea, Country Boy, Slow Motion, and Summer. For these and more great royalty-free tracks, visit bensound, that's BEN sound.com. This episode also features audio clips from Troll 2, Hairspray, The Guild, Inside Edition, and Mean Girls. These audio clips are used under the fair use provisions of the Copyright Act of 1974, covering use for parody, satire, or commentary. Please don't sue me. I don't have any money anyway. Miss Jaye, The Renovation is written and directed by Chris M. Stoner and is a Champagne Dreams production.